My name is Courtney, and I am 28 years old. Once upon a time, I was the only princess in my dad's kingdom. Every day, he would remind me how special I was to him. But kingdoms change when new royalty arrives. After my dad married again, I slowly became invisible as his new wife's children took my place. Years of feeling replaced finally pushed me to stand up for myself and walk away. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away to save yourself. I was only 9 years old when my mom lost her battle with cancer. The memory of her final day in the hospital is still vivid in my mind. Dad held her hand on one side while I clutched her other hand. When she took her last breath, something in my dad changed forever. His eyes, once bright and full of laughter, became clouded with grief. But even through his pain, he made a promise to both my mom and me that day. He would be both father and mother to me. The first few months were the hardest. Dad and I fumbled through our new reality, learning how to exist without mom. He had no idea how to style my hair for school pictures, so I ended up with a lopsided ponytail that year. We burned dinner more times than I could count. Some nights we would both end up crying while looking at old family photos. But through all the awkwardness and grief, an incredible bond formed between us. By my 10th birthday, Dad had mastered the art of throwing a princess party complete with homemade cake and decorations. He stayed up all night blowing up balloons and hanging streamers just to see me smile the next morning. That was the day he first called me his only princess, as he placed a plastic tiara on my head. The nickname stuck, and for years afterward he would use it as a reminder of how special I was to him. Dad made sure I never missed out on anything because I didn't have a mom. When I needed to learn how to ride a bike without training wheels, he spent an entire Saturday running alongside me in the park until I got it right. When I was 12, he taught me how to swim by demonstrating strokes in our community pool, ignoring the amused glances from other parents. Our evenings developed a comfortable routine. We would cook dinner together while dancing to music in the kitchen. Dad would chop vegetables while I stirred pots, both of us singing along terribly to his old 80s playlist. After dinner, we would tackle homework together at the dining table. Math was my weakness, but Dad, who worked as an accountant, made numbers seem less intimidating with his patient explanations. We created special traditions that were just ours. Every third Saturday of the month was declared Just Us Day, where we would do whatever I wanted. Sometimes that meant going to the movies and eating too much popcorn. Other times we would go hiking in the state park, taking silly photos at scenic overlooks. Every summer we went on a week-long camping trip to the mountains where Dad taught me how to pitch a tent, build a campfire, and identify constellations in the night sky. Friday night was always movie night. We would take turns picking films, build a blanket fort in the living room, and stay up late eating microwave popcorn and candy. Even during my teenage years, when most kids would rather die than spend time with their parents, I looked forward to our Friday nights together. What made our relationship special was how Dad always put me first. He turned down promotions that would have required more travel. He adjusted his work schedule to attend every school event, science fair, and soccer game. Unlike other parents who sometimes showed up late or missed performances, Dad was always there sitting in the front row clapping the loudest. Dating was something Dad put on hold for 7 years after Mom died. When I was 14, I asked him why he never went out with anyone. He told me that raising me properly was more important to him than finding someone new. "You're my priority, Courtney," he said. "There will be time for dating later when you're older and more independent." Though I felt a little guilty for monopolizing his time, I was secretly relieved. I feared that if Dad found someone new, I would no longer be the center of his world. During my 16th birthday dinner, I brought up this fear. What if you meet someone and fall in love again? Would I still matter as much? I asked between bites of birthday cake. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Courtney, listen to me. You will always be my only princess. No matter what happens in the future, no one will ever change how much I love you or how important you are to me." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He had never broken a promise before. When it came time for college, I chose a university just 30 minutes from our home. While my friends were eager to move across the country, I wanted to stay close to Dad. I still came home most weekends, and we maintained our Friday movie nights. Dad attended my college choir performances with the same enthusiasm he had shown throughout my childhood. When I made Dean's List my freshman year, he framed the letter and hung it in the hallway right next to my high school diploma. Looking back, those years were precious beyond measure. I had no idea that everything was about to change, that the unbreakable bond between us would soon be tested by new people and new priorities. Had I known what was coming, perhaps I would have cherished those movie nights even more, taken more photos during our camping trips, or told Dad more often how much his devotion meant to me. But life rarely gives us warnings before it shifts beneath our feet. I was 23 and in my final year of college when Dad met Amanda. He came home one evening with an unusual spring in his step and a nervous energy I hadn't seen before. We were preparing dinner together as usual when he casually mentioned meeting someone at a company fundraiser. "Her name is Amanda," he said, trying to sound nonchalant as he chopped carrots. "She works in marketing at a competing firm. We talked for hours at the event." I smiled encouragingly, genuinely happy that Dad might have met someone interesting. After all, I was an adult now and he deserved companionship. "She sounds nice. Are you going to call her?" "Actually," he replied with a slight blush, "we already have plans for dinner tomorrow night." That dinner turned into several more dates. Our Friday movie nights became less consistent as Dad started spending weekends with Amanda. I told myself this was normal and healthy, even as I felt a twinge of loss each time he canceled our plans to see her instead. The first time I met Amanda was at a restaurant downtown. She arrived 15 minutes late, which immediately put me on edge. Dad, who had always been punctual, just smiled indulgently at her tardiness. Amanda was undeniably beautiful with expertly styled blonde hair and an outfit that looked straight from a magazine. At 40, she was younger than Dad, but carried herself with a confidence that commanded attention. Everything about her screamed polished and put together, from her manicured nails to her designer handbag. During dinner, Amanda dominated the conversation, talking extensively about her career achievements and social connections. She asked me a few cursory questions about college, but seemed more interested in telling Dad stories about people he didn't know. I noticed Dad laughing too loudly at her jokes and agreeing with everything she said. It was like watching a performance of someone who looked like my dad, but didn't quite act like him. When the waiter brought the check, Amanda mentioned casually, "Oh, by the way, my kids are excited to meet you both." I nearly choked on my water. "Kids?" I looked at Dad, who suddenly seemed very interested in studying the bill. "I have 3, Amanda said with a practiced smile. "Sophia is 16, Isabella is 14, and Jackson is 12. Their father and I divorced 4 years ago. They primarily live with me." Dad had never mentioned that Amanda had children. Later that night, when I asked him about this significant omission, he shrugged it off. "It never came up in conversation until now," he said unconvincingly. As weeks passed, Dad spent increasingly more time with Amanda and her children. Our Just Us Day was canceled 3 months in a row because Dad had promised to take Amanda's kids to various activities. The first time it was Sophia's dance competition. The next month it was Jackson's baseball tournament. The third time it was a shopping trip for Isabella's school dance. Each cancellation came with profuse apologies and promises to reschedule, but those makeup dates never materialized. When I expressed disappointment, Dad would say, "You understand, right? You're an adult now, but these kids still need guidance and support." The implication stung. I was old enough to handle disappointment while Amanda's children deserved priority. 8 months after they met, Dad announced he was proposing to Amanda. The engagement seemed rushed to me, especially since Dad had spent most of that time navigating the complex dynamics of dating someone with 3 teenagers. But when I expressed concern about the pace, Dad dismissed it. "When you know," he said, echoing a phrase that sounded more like something Amanda would say than his usual thoughtful reasoning. The wedding planning consumed Dad's attention entirely. Amanda wanted an elaborate ceremony at an expensive venue with no expense spared. Dad, who had always been financially prudent, suddenly agreed to spend an amount that made my eyes widen. When I asked if this was really what he wanted, he seemed almost annoyed by the question. "Amanda deserves a beautiful wedding," he said firmly. Besides, this is about creating a perfect blended family. The wedding itself was a lavish affair with 200 guests, most of whom were Amanda's friends and colleagues. I served as Dad's best woman, standing beside him during the ceremony. As I watched him recite vows to Amanda, I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Something felt off, but I couldn't articulate what. Was I just being selfish, unwilling to share my father after having him to myself for so long? During the reception, I barely spent any time with Dad. He was constantly surrounded by Amanda's large extended family or entertaining her influential friends. I found myself sitting alone at a table watching as Dad danced with Amanda's daughters, teaching them the same silly moves he had once taught me. After the honeymoon, Dad announced they would all be moving into a new house together. The home where I had grown up, where all my memories with Mom were housed, would be sold. Dad presented this decision as already finalized without having consulted me at all. The new place has 5 bedrooms, so each of the kids will have their own space plus a guest room for when you visit, he explained, as if this were a benefit rather than a complete upheaval. The new house was in an upscale neighborhood across town, a 40-minute drive from our old home and an hour from my apartment near campus. The distance was not just physical, but felt symbolic of Dad's new life pulling him away from me. When moving day came, I offered to help. Amanda orchestrated everything, directing which furniture to keep and which to donate. Most of our old furniture was deemed outdated and replaced with new pieces she had selected. As I watched movers carrying away the kitchen table where Dad and I had shared thousands of meals, I felt a lump in my throat. That table held the invisible imprints of homework sessions, birthday celebrations, and late-night conversations. Now it was just an outdated piece of wood not worth keeping in Amanda's vision of their new life. The kids moved in with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Sophia, the eldest, claimed the largest bedroom, announcing this decision rather than asking. Isabella immediately began redecorating her room with expensive taste. Jackson seemed quieter but insisted on Dad helping him set up an elaborate gaming system immediately upon arrival. From day one, it was clear that Amanda's children had expectations of being catered to, and more troublingly, Dad seemed eager to meet those expectations. He who had always taught me the value of earning things suddenly became the provider of instant gratification for 3 teenagers he barely knew. I tried to be supportive, visiting the new house for Sunday dinners and making efforts to connect with my new step-siblings. But each visit left me feeling more like an outsider looking in on a family that had formed without me. The dynamics were established, the inside jokes already created, the routines set in place. There was no room for me in this new configuration, and increasingly it seemed Dad didn't notice my absence from it. The changes in Dad's behavior didn't happen overnight. They accumulated gradually, like water droplets slowly filling a bucket, until one day I realized I was drowning in them. Our weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. Dad always had reasonable excuses. He was driving Isabella to dance lessons, helping Jackson with a school project, attending Sophia's choir concert. When I suggested specific times to talk, he would agree but then forget or cancel last minute. "Sorry, princess," he would text. "Amanda needs help with something. Call you tomorrow." Tomorrow would come and go without a call. The first major holiday after the wedding was Thanksgiving. I assumed we would continue our tradition of cooking together, something we had done every year since Mom died. Dad and I had our system down perfectly. He handled the turkey and gravy, I made the sides and desserts, and we would spend the day in the kitchen, reminiscing about Mom while creating new memories. When I asked what time I should arrive to start cooking, Dad sounded confused. "Oh, Amanda has already planned everything. Her sister is a caterer, so she's handling the meal. Just come around 4. I arrived at the new house to find it transformed with decorations I didn't recognize. Amanda's extended family dominated the space, talking loudly and occupying all the prime seating areas. The meal was served on new china I had never seen before, not the set that had belonged to my grandmother. I sat at the far end of the table, separated from Dad by Amanda's children and her relatives. When I tried to tell a story about our past Thanksgiving traditions, Amanda smoothly changed the subject to her own family's holidays. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room to watch football, a tradition I knew Dad had never particularly enjoyed. Yet there he was, enthusiastically explaining plays to Jackson and cheering for a team he had never followed before. When I asked if we could steal a few minutes to talk privately, Dad looked at his watch. "Maybe later, Courtney. The game's getting good." Later never came. I left that night feeling like I had visited strangers, not family. Our annual summer camping trip, a tradition that had survived even my college years, was the next casualty. 3 weeks before our scheduled departure, Dad called to cancel. "Amanda found this great beach resort in Florida," he explained excitedly. "The kids have never been to Disney World, so we thought we'd combine it with a theme park visit. We'll be gone the same week we usually go camping." "Could we reschedule our trip for another week?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "This summer is pretty packed with the kids' activities," Dad replied. "Maybe next year we can figure something out. You understand, right?" I said I did, but I didn't. Not really. What I understood was that I was being systematically replaced, my traditions discarded for new ones that didn't include me. I made several attempts to connect with Amanda's children, thinking perhaps if I could bond with them, I could still maintain a place in Dad's life. I invited Sophia for coffee, offering to share insights about the college application process since she was starting to look at schools. She accepted, but spent the entire time texting friends and giving monosyllabic answers to my questions. I tried helping Isabella with a school project on photography, a hobby I had enjoyed for years. She seemed interested until Amanda suggested hiring a professional photographer to teach her instead. "No offense to your skills, Courtney," Amanda said with a thin smile, "but Isabella shows real talent. She needs expert guidance." Jackson was slightly more receptive when I offered to attend one of his baseball games, but his enthusiasm was primarily focused on whether Dad would buy him new equipment afterward. "Your dad always gets me whatever I need for baseball," he mentioned casually. "Last week he got me these $300 cleats just because I said I liked them." The comment stuck with me because Dad had always been careful with money when I was growing up. We lived comfortably but not extravagantly. I had to save my allowance for months to buy special items, with Dad teaching me about financial responsibility along the way. Now he was apparently purchasing expensive gear on a whim for a child he had known less than a year. My 24th birthday arrived 6 months after the wedding. Dad had never forgotten my birthday before, not once in my entire life. Even during the darkest days after Mom died, he had managed to make each birthday special with thoughtful gifts and homemade cards. I waited all day for his call. When my phone finally rang that evening, my heart leapt only to crash when I saw it was just a friend inviting me out for drinks. No card arrived in the mail, no text message, nothing. 3 days later, Dad finally called, his voice rushed and apologetic. "Courtney, I am so sorry about missing your birthday. Isabella had a dance recital, and with all the preparation and driving her to rehearsals, it completely slipped my mind." The excuse felt hollow. Dad had previously managed to remember my birthday while working 60-hour weeks and dealing with Mom's illness. A dance recital shouldn't have erased his only daughter from his mind. "It's fine," I lied. "These things happen." "Let me make it up to you," he offered. "Let's do dinner next week, just the two of us." I agreed, allowing hope to flicker briefly. Perhaps this was the wake-up call Dad needed to realize how distant we had become. But when I arrived at the restaurant, Dad wasn't alone. Amanda and all 3 children were already seated at the table. "I hope you don't mind," Dad said, not meeting my eyes. Amanda thought it would be nice to make this a family celebration. Throughout dinner, Dad barely spoke directly to me. He was preoccupied with cutting Jackson's steak, listening to Sophia's complaints about her math teacher, and discussing Isabella's upcoming dance competition. Amanda dominated any attempt at conversation, steering topics toward her children's accomplishments. My birthday was acknowledged with a hastily purchased gift card and a store-bought cake that featured the wrong flavor. I tried addressing my concerns with Dad several times. After one particularly disappointing Sunday dinner, where I had barely exchanged 10 words with him, I asked if we could talk privately. We stepped out onto the back patio, and I carefully explained how excluded I had been feeling. "I hardly see you anymore, Dad," I said, fighting back tears. "It feels like I'm not important in your life now." Dad's response shocked me. You need to grow up, Courtney. I have other responsibilities now. Amanda and the kids need me. You're an adult with your own life. I can't drop everything whenever you want attention. Attention. Was that what he thought I wanted? Not love or connection, or the relationship we had always shared, but attention like a child throwing a tantrum. I'm not asking you to drop everything, I replied, hurt evident in my voice. I'm just asking not to be forgotten completely. Dad sighed heavily. You're being dramatic. Nobody's forgotten you. You just need to try harder to fit in with the new family dynamic. Amanda says you've been standoffish with the kids. It was the first time I realized Amanda was discussing me with Dad behind my back, framing my actions in the worst possible light. And worse, Dad was accepting her version without question. As the months passed, I noticed how Amanda subtly controlled Dad's decisions. She never directly forbade him from spending time with me, but always created conflicts or obligations that took precedence. If I suggested meeting for lunch, she would suddenly remember an important appointment where Dad's presence was required. If I invited him to an event, there was inevitably some activity involving her children that couldn't possibly be rescheduled. The most painful discovery came when I visited the new house and needed to use the bathroom. Walking down the hallway, I noticed the family photos on the wall. There were dozens of beautifully framed pictures: Amanda and Dad's wedding, the kids at various activities, family vacations I hadn't been invited to join. I searched the entire display for a single photo that included me. Finally, in a corner near the guest bathroom, I found one small frame containing a picture of Dad and me from my high school graduation, partially hidden behind a decorative vase. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was an afterthought relegated to the margins of Dad's new life, while Amanda and her children took center stage. If I had to identify the exact moment when my heart finally shattered completely, it would be the day of my college graduation. After 5 years of hard work balancing classes and a part-time job, I was finally receiving my business degree with honors. Throughout college, Dad had been my biggest supporter, even as our relationship became strained after his marriage. Despite everything, I never doubted he would be there for this milestone, front and center, proud and punctual as he had been for every important event in my life. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I had reserved seats in the family section, texting Dad the details weeks in advance and following up several times to confirm. "Absolutely, princess," he had replied. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." At 9:45, as I lined up with my fellow graduates, I scanned the audience for Dad. The seats I had saved remained empty. I kept checking my phone, expecting a message saying he was running late or stuck in traffic. Nothing came. The ceremony began. Names were called. Students crossed the stage. Still no sign of Dad. When they called Courtney Miller, I walked across the stage with a smile fixed firmly on my face, looking out at the audience and seeing only strangers. It wasn't until I was walking back to my seat, diploma in hand, that I spotted Dad slipping into the auditorium with Amanda. They were 45 minutes late. Dad was straightening his tie as if he had dressed in a hurry. They found seats at the very back, far from the reserved section. After the ceremony, as other graduates hugged their families and took photos, I approached Dad with a knot in my stomach. "You missed most of it," I said quietly, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "I know, and I'm so sorry," Dad replied, looking genuinely contrite. "Sophia needed a last-minute shopping trip for a dress. She has a dance tonight and nothing to wear. We had to go to 3 different stores before she found something she liked." Amanda jumped in. "It was an emergency, Courtney. You know how important these social events are for teenagers. We came as quickly as we could." An emergency shopping trip for a teenage girl I barely knew had taken precedence over watching his only daughter graduate from college. The realization was like ice water in my veins. Dad suggested we go to lunch to celebrate. At the restaurant, he seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. Before our food even arrived, he leaned over apologetically. "Jackson has a soccer game at 3. We need to wrap this up by 2 so I can get him there on time." Our celebration lunch lasted exactly 42 minutes. Dad gave me a graduation card with a check inside and a quick hug before rushing off to ensure Amanda's son wouldn't be late for a regular season soccer game. I sat alone at the table staring at my half-eaten meal, wondering when exactly I had become an inconvenient obligation rather than a beloved daughter. The financial blow came a week later. I had been planning to attend graduate school, relying partly on the college fund Mom and Dad had established before she died. Mom had specifically set aside money from her life insurance for my education, wanting to ensure I could pursue advanced degrees without crippling debt. When I called Dad to discuss the paperwork for accessing these funds, his hesitation was palpable. "About that college account," he began awkwardly. "There have been some changes." Through a painful conversation, I learned that Dad had used a significant portion of my education fund to buy a car for Sophia when she turned 16 2 months earlier. A brand new car, not the used models Dad had always insisted were more financially sensible. When I reminded him that the money had come from Mom specifically for my education, he became defensive. "Sophia needed reliable transportation, and we're a family now. We share resources. Besides, you can take out loans for graduate school like most people do." The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was the casual discarding of Mom's wishes, the reallocation of resources meant for me to someone who had been in his life for less than 2 years. It was learning that family now meant Amanda's children, while I was expected to fend for myself. The home front delivered additional painful revelations. During a rare visit to help Dad organize some old papers, I discovered boxes containing Mom's belongings in the garage. These precious mementos, photographs, jewelry, letters had previously been displayed prominently or carefully stored in Dad's bedroom. Now they were packed away in cardboard gathering dust. When I asked about them, Dad looked uncomfortable. "Amanda thought it was time to pack those away. She said having another woman's things around the house made her uncomfortable." "But these are Mom's things," I protested. "They're important to me." Dad shrugged helplessly. "We need to respect Amanda's feelings. This is her home too." Her home, not our home, not my childhood home reimagined. Her home where my mother's existence was systematically being erased. In a last attempt to reconnect with Dad, I suggested we take a weekend trip, just the two of us. "Like we used to," I said hopefully. "We could go to the mountains, maybe do some hiking. No phones, no distractions, just us catching up." Dad's response crushed that final hope. "I don't think that would be fair to Amanda and the kids," he said slowly. "They're my family now, Courtney. I can't just leave them to go off with you like nothing has changed." Like nothing has changed. As if wanting to spend time with my father was an unreasonable expectation, a denial of reality, rather than a desperate attempt to salvage what was left of our relationship. I began to notice how Amanda's children were integrated into family decisions in ways I never was. Jackson's preference dictated which movie they would see as a family. Sophia's opinion determined their vacation destinations. Isabella's schedule shaped their weekend plans. Meanwhile, I wasn't even consulted about selling the home I grew up in. Then came the financial hammer blow. For the past year, Dad had been helping me with a small monthly stipend that covered part of my apartment rent while I finished college and searched for a full-time job. 1 month, the money didn't arrive. When I called to ask about it, Dad sounded evasive. "We've had some unexpected expenses come up," he explained vaguely. "Isabella got accepted to this prestigious private school for her artistic talents, and the tuition is substantial. We had to make some budget adjustments." "So you're cutting me off completely?" I asked, stunned. "Without any warning." "It's not cutting you off," Dad insisted. "It's expecting you to stand on your own 2 feet. You have a degree now. You should be self-sufficient." The hypocrisy was staggering. The same man who had voluntarily assumed financial responsibility for 3 teenagers who weren't his biological children was now claiming he couldn't afford to help his actual daughter through a temporary rough patch. But the moment that broke me completely happened during an unplanned visit to the house. I had stopped by to drop off some paperwork Dad needed to sign. As I approached the front door, I heard voices through the open window. Dad and Sophia were in the living room, apparently having a heart-to-heart conversation. "You know you're my princess, right?" Dad said to her, his voice warm with affection. "I'll always be here for you no matter what." My princess. The special name he had promised would always be mine alone. now casually bestowed upon a girl he had known for less than 2 years, while I stood outside the door, suddenly invisible. I didn't knock. I left the papers in the mailbox and drove away, tears blurring my vision. The dad I had known, the one who had promised I would always be his only princess, was gone. In his place was a stranger who had given away not just his time, money, and attention, but even the special words that had once belonged only to me. My 28th birthday arrived with no acknowledgement from Dad. No call, no text, not even a belated card. When I finally reached him by phone a week later, he explained that he had taken Amanda and the kids to Disney World that week. "It was a surprise trip I planned months ago," he said casually. "The kids had spring break, so it seemed like perfect timing." Perfect timing, except that it coincided with his daughter's birthday, a date he had celebrated faithfully for 27 years until now. I had spent that day alone in my apartment, waiting for a call that never came, eventually opening a bottle of wine and toasting myself in the mirror. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The financial strain hit next. Without Dad's monthly contribution to my rent, which he had canceled without warning, I was suddenly responsible for twice the housing cost I had budgeted for. My entry-level job barely covered the full amount, plus utilities and student loan payments. I began dipping into my meager savings, knowing they would be depleted within months at this rate. When I called Dad to discuss the situation, Amanda answered his phone. "He's helping Isabella with an art project right now," she said, her tone suggesting this was far too important to interrupt. "I can have him call you back later." Later turned into days. When Dad finally returned my call, I explained my financial predicament as calmly as I could. "I'm not asking for ongoing support," I clarified. "Just a little help while I look for a better paying position or a roommate. The rental market is tough right now." "We really can't help at the moment," Dad replied, sounding distant. "We just paid tuition for Sophia's first semester of college, and Jackson needs braces. Our budget is stretched pretty thin." I bit back the obvious retort that they seemed to afford Disney vacations just fine. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "Dad, why does their well-being always come before mine now? They have 2 parents. I only have you." His answer revealed everything. "They're younger, Courtney. They need more guidance and support. You're an adult now. You need to handle your own problems." I was an adult, yes, but I was still his child. When had that stopped mattering? For weeks, I tried to arrange a private conversation with Dad away from Amanda's influence. Each attempt was thwarted. Either Amanda would insert herself into the discussion, or Dad would claim he was too busy with family obligations. Finally, after nearly a month of trying, I managed to meet Dad alone at a coffee shop during his lunch break. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, determined to remain calm and rational rather than emotional. "Dad," I began carefully, "I've felt increasingly pushed out of your life since you married Amanda. I understand that you have a new family now, but I'm still your daughter. I still need you in my life." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Nobody's pushing you out, Courtney. You're always welcome to join us for family dinners." "Family dinners where I sit silently while everyone talks about events I wasn't invited to," I countered. "Where I'm treated like a distant acquaintance rather than your daughter." Dad's expression hardened. "You're not making enough effort to be part of the family. Amanda says you've been cold toward her and the kids." "I've tried, Dad. I've really tried. But they don't want me there, and honestly, it doesn't seem like you do either." "When was the last time we spent any real time together, just us?" Instead of addressing my question, Dad went on the offensive. "The kids never complain like this. They understand family dynamics and compromise. Sophia is working part-time to help with her college expenses. Isabella volunteers to help with household chores. Jackson never asks for anything." The comparison was so blatantly false that I almost laughed. I had personally witnessed all 3 children making demands and throwing tantrums when they didn't get their way. Dad's revisionist history was both baffling and hurtful. "This isn't about them, Dad. This is about us. About how everything changed when you married Amanda. About how you broke every promise you ever made to me." Dad checked his watch, already mentally leaving the conversation. I think you're being dramatic and selfish. I raised you better than this, Courtney. I need to get back to work now. As he stood to leave, I asked one final question. Did you sell the house, our old house? His hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. It closed last week. We got above asking price. The house where I grew up, the house where Mom had lived, sold without even telling me, without offering me the chance to say goodbye to the place that held my entire childhood. That evening, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by past photos of Dad and me, a notification pinged on my phone. It was a social media update from Sophia showing my family celebrating the sale of my childhood home with champagne and cake. The caption read, "New beginnings, so excited for the vacation house we're buying with the money from selling the old place." A vacation house. They had sold my childhood home to buy a second property for themselves. The knowledge settled in my chest like a stone. That night, I wrote Dad a letter. Not an angry, accusatory letter, but an honest accounting of how his choices had affected me. I described the slow erosion of our relationship, the broken promises, the painful realizations. I detailed the specific moments when I had felt replaced, forgotten, or deliberately excluded. I explained how it felt to watch him give Amanda's children the love, support, and resources that had once been mine. I concluded not with demands, but with a statement of boundaries. I cannot continue to make myself available for rejection. I cannot keep showing up to be ignored. I deserve better even if you no longer believe that. So I'm stepping away, Dad. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. When and if you're ready to have a relationship with me that doesn't require me to accept being treated as less important than everyone else in your life, you know how to reach me. The next day, I accepted a job offer in a city 500 miles away, a position I had initially been hesitant about because of the distance. Now that distance seemed like exactly what I needed. I gave notice at my apartment, packed my belongings, and within 2 weeks was driving toward a new beginning of my own. Dad called once when he received my letter, leaving a voicemail that managed to be both defensive and dismissive. "I think you're overreacting," he said. "Every family has adjustments. Running away won't solve anything." But I wasn't running away. For the first time in years, I was running towards something, a life where my worth wasn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. Moving to a new city where I knew absolutely no one was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I rented a small but affordable apartment close to my new job in marketing. The position paid better than my previous one, allowing me to cover my expenses without constant financial stress. Still, starting over completely was overwhelming. The first few weeks were the hardest. I would come home from work to an empty apartment and instinctively reach for my phone to call Dad, only to remember that our relationship had fundamentally changed. Some nights I would scroll through old photos wondering if I had made the right decision in creating such definitive distance between us. My phone rarely rang. Dad called exactly twice in the first month after I moved. The first call lasted less than 5 minutes, with him asking perfunctory questions about my new job before mentioning he needed to help Jackson with homework. The second call was even shorter and ended with him suggesting I should stop holding a grudge and make an effort to visit the family. The family. Never come visit me or I miss you. Always framed as my responsibility to insert myself into a unit that had formed without me and showed no interest in including me. After those calls, I found myself spiraling into doubt and sadness. Was I being unreasonable? Was I throwing away my relationship with my only parent over what might be temporary adjustments? The questions plagued me until I finally decided to seek professional help. My health insurance covered limited therapy sessions, and I found a counselor named Dr. Winters who specialized in family dynamics. During our first session, I poured out the entire story, half expecting her to tell me I was overreacting just as Dad had claimed. Instead, she validated my feelings. "What you're describing sounds like parental abandonment," she explained gently. "Not physical abandonment, but emotional. Your father has systematically prioritized his new family over you, breaking promises and trust in the process." Over the next several months, our weekly sessions helped me understand that my pain wasn't selfishness. It was a natural response to rejection from the person who had promised never to reject me. Doctor. Winters helped me develop coping strategies for the grief I was experiencing. Grief for the father I had lost, even though he was still alive. At work, I threw myself into projects earning the respect of my supervisors and colleagues. One coworker in particular, Natalie, became a friend after we discovered we shared similar family experiences. Her father had also remarried and subsequently distanced himself from his previous children. Over lunch breaks, we would share stories and support each other through difficult days. My therapist calls it the replacement family syndrome, Natalie told me one day. It's when a parent essentially tries to get a do-over with a new family, leaving the children from the first marriage behind. Hearing that there was an actual term for what I had experienced was strangely comforting. I wasn't alone. This happened to other people too, enough that psychologists had studied and named it. Natalie invited me to a support group for adult children of parental abandonment. At first, I was hesitant, still uncomfortable with applying such a strong term to my situation. But attending that first meeting was transformative. Listening to others share stories so similar to mine helped dissolve the isolation I had been feeling. Through the group, I learned techniques for establishing healthy boundaries without cutting ties completely. I practiced responses to guilt trips and learned to recognize manipulation tactics. Most importantly, I began to understand that my value wasn't diminished by Dad's inability to prioritize me. His choices reflected his limitations, not my worth. Dad's calls became even less frequent. When he did call, it was usually to express disappointment that I hadn't visited or to relay messages from Amanda about how the family felt I was being distant. I never mentioned therapy or the support group, knowing he would dismiss these as overreactions. 3 months into my new life, Dad called with news that felt calculated to hurt. "We're using the money from selling the house to buy a boat," he announced. "Amanda thinks it would be great for family bonding on weekends." The house where Mom and I had lived, where all my childhood memories were formed, had been liquidated for a recreational vehicle for his new family. I managed a neutral, "That sounds nice," before finding a reason to end the call. As Thanksgiving approached, Dad assumed I would make the long journey back for the holiday. "Amanda's planning a big dinner," he said. "The whole family will be there." "Actually," I replied with newfound confidence, "I've made other plans this year." Those plans were a Friendsgiving, organized by Natalie. She had invited several people from our support group along with other friends who for various reasons weren't spending the holiday with family. We each brought a dish, gathering around Natalie's mismatched furniture in her cozy apartment. The conversation was lively, the food delicious, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an afterthought at a holiday table. We took photos that evening, lots of them. I posted a few online with the caption, "Grateful for chosen family." Dad saw the photos and called the next day, his tone a mixture of hurt and accusation. "You could have been with your real family," he said. "I was with people who wanted me there," I replied simply. Christmas brought similar dynamics. Dad sent a gift card with a generic message. I sent thoughtfully chosen gifts for him, and because I couldn't bring myself to be petty small items for Amanda and her children as well. I received no acknowledgement from any of them, except Dad's brief text, "Got the packages, thanks." 8 months after moving, I received an unexpected promotion at work. My boss praised my dedication and creative contributions to recent campaigns. The promotion came with a significant salary increase that finally allowed me financial stability. The day I received the news, I almost called Dad before stopping myself. Would he even care? Or would he immediately pivot to something Jackson or Sophia had accomplished? Instead, I called Natalie, who insisted on taking me out to celebrate. At the restaurant, she introduced me to her cousin David, who was visiting from out of town. David was easy to talk to, with a quiet intelligence and genuine interest in people. As the evening progressed, I found myself enjoying his company more than I had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. David lived just an hour from my new city, and after that initial meeting, we began dating. What struck me most about him was how he listened, truly listened when I spoke. He never checked his phone mid-conversation or dismissed my feelings as overreactions. When I eventually shared the story of Dad and our estrangement, David didn't offer platitudes or suggest I simply get over it. Instead, he acknowledged the pain of my experience without trying to fix it. "Family is complicated," he said, holding my hand across the table. "And everyone's healing happens at their own pace. Whatever you need, whether it's space from your dad or eventual reconciliation, I support your choice." His words were a balm to wounds that had been open for too long. With David, I didn't have to justify my feelings or minimize my pain. I could simply be honest about the complicated love and hurt I felt toward Dad. As months passed, I built a life that felt increasingly whole. My job challenged and rewarded me. I had friends who understood and supported me. I was dating someone who showed me what respect and consideration looked like. My apartment began to feel like home, filled with new memories and possibilities, rather than ghosts of what I had lost. Dad's communication continued to dwindle. His calls, now monthly at best, followed a pattern: brief inquiries about my job, comments about Amanda's children's accomplishments, and subtle guilt trips about my absence from family events. I maintained cordial but boundaried responses, no longer allowing myself to hope for the relationship we once had. What I was doing wasn't cutting Dad off. It was accepting the relationship he was actually offering, rather than continuing to hurt myself by expecting the one he had promised, but failed to deliver. 2 years passed since I had moved away from my hometown and established boundaries with my father. In that time, I had built a life I was proud of: a meaningful career, genuine friendships, and a relationship with David that had grown into something deep and sustaining. The sharp pain of Dad's betrayal had dulled to an occasional ache, manageable if not entirely gone. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone lit up with a series of text messages from Dad. Unlike his usual brief check-ins, these were urgent, asking me to call him as soon as possible. Something in their tone instantly transported me back to the days when we had been close, when his voice had been my anchor, rather than a source of pain. I stepped away from my desk at work and returned his call, heart pounding with a mixture of concern and wariness. "Courtney?" Dad's voice cracked slightly when he answered. "Thank you for calling back. I know things have been strained between us." "Is everything okay?" I asked, bracing myself for news of illness or some other crisis. "No," he admitted quietly. "Everything is not okay. Amanda and I are divorcing. She's been having an affair with her financial advisor for the past year. She asked for a divorce 3 weeks ago." The news should have brought satisfaction, some sense of vindication after how Amanda had come between us. Instead, I felt only sadness for Dad's pain and a complicated tangle of other emotions I couldn't immediately sort through. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Are you all right?" A long pause followed before Dad answered. "No, not really. Amanda is taking half of everything in the settlement, including the vacation house. She's moving with the kids to California to be with this guy. They're leaving next month." "The kids are going too?" I asked, surprised that teenagers would so readily leave friends and school behind. Dad's bitter laugh told me everything. "Of course. They go where the money is. Turns out they never saw me as anything but an ATM. The minute this other guy showed up with more money and bigger promises, they couldn't wait to leave." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had sacrificed our relationship to prioritize children who had apparently never truly bonded with him. He had been used just as I had warned him he might be. But there was no satisfaction in being right, only a hollow sadness for everything that had been needlessly lost. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Courtney," Dad continued. "About you, about us, about the mistakes I've made. I've been a terrible father to you these past few years. I let myself get so caught up in trying to be the perfect stepfather that I forgot I already had a daughter who needed me." His words brought tears to my eyes, tears I had thought were long cried out. But I remained silent, unwilling to make this easy for him with immediate forgiveness. "I'd like to see you," he said finally. "If you're willing. I understand if you're not. I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to speak to me again. But I miss you, Princess. I miss who we were together. The old nickname sent a jolt through me, a mixture of pain at its previous betrayal and a tiny flicker of hope that perhaps the father I had once known still existed somewhere. I need to think about it, I replied honestly. This is a lot to process. After discussing it with David and my therapist, I agreed to meet Dad at a coffee shop halfway between our cities the following Saturday. The neutral location was important to me, a place with no history, no memories, no power imbalance. When I arrived, Dad was already seated at a corner table looking smaller and older than I remembered. His hair had more gray and deep lines had formed around his mouth and eyes. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly, clearly uncertain whether to offer a hug. I made the decision for him, extending my hand for a handshake instead. The hurt in his eyes was evident, but he accepted this boundary with a nod. "Thank you for coming," he said as we sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. For the next hour, Dad talked more openly than he had in years. He described how he had been seduced not just by Amanda, but by the ready-made family she offered a chance to feel needed and important again after years of watching me grow increasingly independent. He confessed to ignoring red flags about Amanda's materialistic nature and the children's manipulative behavior because he had been desperate to believe in the perfect blended family narrative. "I convinced myself that you were an adult who didn't need me anymore," he said, his voice thick with regret. "That somehow justified pouring everything into them. But the truth is, I was running away from the grief of losing your mom from watching you grow up and need me less. I wanted to feel like the hero again, and they made that easy until they didn't need me anymore either." As he spoke, I saw for the first time the wounded man behind the father who had hurt me so deeply. Not an excuse for his behavior, but perhaps an explanation that made some sense of the senseless abandonment I had experienced. "You broke my heart, Dad," I said finally, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "You promised I would always be your only princess, that nothing would change how important I was to you. Then you gave everything, including that special name, to children who barely knew you while pushing me further and further away." Dad wiped away tears without embarrassment. "I know. There's no excuse for how I treated you. I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way." The money was one thing. I continued, needing to say everything I had carried for so long. The canceled plans, the forgotten birthday, selling our house, all of that hurt. But what broke me was feeling like I didn't matter anymore. Like the moment someone shinier came along, I became disposable to you. "You were never disposable," Dad insisted, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching my hand when he saw me tense. "I lost sight of what matters. I forgot who I was, who we were together. The man I became in that marriage isn't someone I recognize or respect." We talked for over 3 hours, ordering more coffee and eventually lunch. I shared how his choices had affected me, the financial strain, the emotional toll, the therapy I had needed to process the abandonment. Dad listened without defensiveness, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. When we finally prepared to leave, Dad asked the question that clearly terrified him. "Is there any chance we could start rebuilding? I know it won't be the same. I know I have to earn your trust back. But I miss you, Courtney. I miss my daughter." I considered his question carefully before answering. "I can't go back to how things were," I said finally. "That relationship is gone, and mourning it was part of my healing. But maybe we can build something new, something with better boundaries and more honesty. I'm willing to try slowly." The relief in Dad's eyes was palpable. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." "This isn't forgiveness yet," I clarified. "That might come with time. This is just an open door, a possibility." We established some ground rules for our tentative new relationship. We would talk on the phone once a week for at least 15 minutes. We would be honest about our feelings even when difficult. And most importantly, we would respect each other's boundaries and new lives. Dad would need to understand that I had built a fulfilling existence that didn't revolve around him anymore, just as I understood that he needed to rebuild his life after Amanda. Over the following months, Dad kept every promise. He called when he said he would. He listened when I shared news about work or David without trying to change the subject. He remembered my birthday with a thoughtful gift and card that acknowledged our journey without pretending the hard parts hadn't happened. 6 months after our coffee shop meeting, I invited Dad to visit my city for a weekend. I showed him my apartment, my office, my favorite restaurants. I introduced him to Natalie and some of my other friends. And finally, I introduced him to David, who by then had become an essential part of my life. Dad made an effort with everyone, especially David. As I watched them talking earnestly at dinner, I realized that Dad was trying to know the man I loved, rather than instantly trying to establish himself as the most important man in my life. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it signaled a significant shift in how he viewed our relationship. That night, after David had gone home and Dad was preparing to sleep on my sofa bed, he handed me a small wrapped package. "This isn't for any special occasion," he said. "It's just something I wanted you to have." Inside was a delicate silver frame containing a photo I had never seen before. It showed Mom in a hospital bed holding newborn me, with Dad looking at us both with pure adoration. On the back, Mom had written, "The day our princess arrived." "I found it when I was going through boxes after the divorce," Dad explained. "Your mom picked that nickname for you before I ever did. She called you her little princess from the first moment she held you." The gift wasn't just a photo. It was an acknowledgement that the special bond we had shared after Mom died hadn't been created from nothing. It had been a continuation of the love that had always existed in our family of three. It was Dad's way of reconnecting me to Mom and to our shared history, something he had allowed to be erased during his marriage to Amanda. As I sit here now reflecting on the long and painful journey that brought me to where I am today, I understand that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from those who cannot value us properly. I had to leave to find myself to discover my own worth separate from Dad's ability to see it. And ironically, it was only after I left that Dad finally began to see clearly what he had lost. Our relationship today isn't what it once was. It probably never will be. But it's honest in a way it never was before. I no longer expect Dad to be perfect, and he no longer expects me to accept scraps of his attention as though they were feasts. We are two adults with a complicated history trying to build something new and better from the ruins of what was destroyed. The greatest gift I gave myself wasn't walking away from Dad. It was walking toward my own value, my own boundaries, my own capacity to build a life filled with people who see and appreciate me for exactly who I am. In doing so, I created space for Dad to return not as the center of my world, but as one important piece of it. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved to protect yourself? Did you eventually find your way back to each other? Or did you discover that the distance was what you actually needed? Share your stories in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most necessary growth. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey helps you navigate your own with a little more courage and a lot more self-love.